So check this out. Over here we have this very kind of Greek temple looking building with the columns. And then over here we have this wonderful masterpiece, neo-Baroque style, looking gorgeous. And then over here, of course, we have a very kind of French chateau inspired castle, all built by the same guy. So we've got Greek, we've got British, we've got French. Where else could we be but Victoria, Canada? Of course. You know how when you're a kid and all you ask is why? Well, I never quite outgrew that whole quest for knowledge phase. In fact, I've made a career out of asking who, what, where, why, and how as an arts and travel reporter for the past 20 years. So, if I have an insatiable curiosity about the exciting, inspiring, beautiful world of art, architecture, and hidden history all around us, I bet you do too. This isn't your typical what to do on a vacation travel show. Oh no. This is your all-access pass to a deeper understanding of the world's great art and architecture, people and places, history, and how did they do that. So come along on our educational journey, our field trip for grown-ups who have never quite grown up, and learn with Curious Traveler. Curious Traveler is made possible by
Oceana Cruises. We explore the majestic Mediterranean, ancient empires, artistic discoveries, worldwide cuisine. Your world awaits your discovery. Oceana Cruises. Your world, your way. OceanaCruises.com.
Pocket Protein, liquid protein on the go, designed for travel. PocketProtein.com.
Anatomy. European traveling clothing for women. Your adventure, your style. Anatomy.com.
Here's what I'm curious about in Victoria. Why does British Columbia here on the West Coast share its name with the District of Columbia on the East Coast? Why is this Canadian city named after a British queen? Why are these ladies here? That flag doesn't look quite right. Why are the sidewalks purple? Is that Morse code? What's a Bonanza Castle? And once and for all, is it pinkies up or pinkies down at tea time? From British architecture to British rulers to that quintessential British tradition of tea time, why is Victoria so British? Well, because of fur. Western Canada was once part of the Hudson's Bay Company. Wait, I thought that was a clothing store. Well, HBC started out as a British fur trading business named after Hudson Bay in eastern Canada. And believe it or not, it actually functioned as a de facto government here in the unclaimed territories of Western Canada. They even had their own flag and crest. And that is why you will see so many Hudson's Bay Company stores here today. So that is partly where we get the British in British Columbia. Now, what about Columbia? And why is that also the name of Washington, D.C., District of Columbia? Time for our Why Is That There moment. Well, that one's a doozy. Columbia is actually a good old made-in-America, made-up goddess, symbolizing freedom, of course, and likely named after Christopher Columbus. But how did all that East Coast Americanism get all the way over here to West Coast Canada? By ship, of course. In 1792, a ship named the Columbia Rediviva sailed up this river, and Captain Robert Gray named it the Columbia River. The area around it was later named the Columbia District. And the northern half became British, and British Columbia was born. Now, why the name Victoria? Well, for thousands of years, this island was home to First Nations people, and the word for their island was Camasun, which is why you'll see Camasun College here today. Later, as Europeans settled here, in 1843, James Douglas established Fort Victoria, named in honor of Queen Victoria. And Fort Victoria became the headquarters for Hudson's Bay Company in British Columbia. But beginning in 1886, it was time to bring something more sophisticated to this frontier town, and for that, we go to Victoria's Greek Temple to learn about Canada's first transcontinental railway.
The Canadian Pacific Railway was responsible for opening up Western Canada. They really are responsible for a lot of Victoria as well, the steamship terminal and the Empress Hotel.
That's right. To bring the social elite out to the wilderness, Canadian Pacific Railway had a wonderful idea. Build a series of European castle-style hotels conveniently located near their train stations. Sort of a build it and they will come kind of thing. But Victoria is out on an island with no bridge to connect the train out here. So what did the railway do?
People took the train across the country and they ran steamships from Vancouver to Victoria.
So that's why this stately Greek temple-looking steamship terminal is here, built by Francis Rattenbury in a Beaux-Arts interpretation of classical Greek architecture.
It is really somewhat responsible for the growth of the entire city of Victoria.
This was the front door for Victoria for most people.
And once travelers stepped through that front door, one of those majestic railway hotels awaited them, the Empress Hotel, also designed by Francis Rattenbury.
Built between 1904 and 1908, the Empress is the true icon of Victoria, and it is easy to see why. It is a true Edwardian-era landmark, has an aura of sophistication, and was literally built to impress kings and queens.
Named the Empress after Queen Victoria, the hotel's guest list was a who's who of the early 20th century, like Edward, Prince of Wales in 1919, King George and Queen Elizabeth as part of their royal tour in 1939. Later, Sir Winston Churchill, Shirley Temple, and Rudyard Kipling rounded out the VIP list.
Ooh.
But the biggest star is the Empress herself. A masterpiece in chateau-style architecture, Rattenbury was inspired by the late 15th to early 17th century castles in Francis Loire Valley. But does the Empress, as regal as she is, look a little, well, crooked? The Empress was actually built on a bog, so she's sinking a little bit. In fact, about a quarter inch a year. But no matter, she's still beautiful, so let's go on in. Today, you just look for the sign, but for decades, there was no sign here.
When the hotel opened in 1908, obviously only the most well-to-do could afford to stay here. So in fact, when that sign went up many years later, apparently an irate guest said, if you have to have a sign to tell you this is the Empress, well, then you shouldn't be staying here.
Indeed.
The Empress is perhaps best known for its classic Victorian afternoon tea service, where all those VIPs shared in the grand British tradition of afternoon tea. But why do we have afternoon tea at all? Well, because of electricity.
Afternoon tea was originated around the 1850s, mid-1800s, when it was becoming very fashionable to have a very late dinner. You know, kerosene lamps were being introduced into wealthy homes and things. So dinner would be held late time in the evening. So at the time, the Duchess of Bedford, she had a very sinking feeling in the afternoon, very hungry, waiting for that late dinner.
About to pass out because she was starving to death, pretty much.
So she invited some friends over, and they had some tea and pastries and things like that, and that's how afternoon tea started as we know it today.
With Queen Mary and King George forever watching over from portraits hung in this very spot since 1908, it is time to review our tea time manners.
Is there any particular way we are or are not supposed to hold our cups?
You know, you're not supposed to support it from the bottom
Okay.
or lift up the saucer with it with one hand,
Okay.
the index finger and the thumb holding it.
Okay. And don't blow on the top if it's too hot. You just have to man up.
Exactly. So you don't blow on it, no cheersing as well.
And you will sip from the same china pattern as queens and kings.
We had a royal visit in 1939 of Queen Elizabeth II and King George, and this was created for their visit.
The pattern features that beautiful original palm court window, which is where tea was originally held.
Speaking of the palm court, which is behind us, there's a very important reason why tea was moved from the palm court into the tea lobby that we're in now.
Yes.
What was that reason?
Well, the acoustics of the dome in the palm court echo sounds very well. So people were saying that they were able to hear other people gossiping about each other. Gossiping, yes.
Because when you think of tea time, it's typically, you know, ladies gossiping. I'm sorry to do a stereotype, but it's true. Which is another reason why, hopefully I'm picking this up properly, the brim of the teacup, it's very wide.
Yes, legend has it is a little wider, so it covers them out as well. The ladies were gossiping.
So literally they'd go, I can't believe what she's wearing over there.
Exactly.
That's hilarious.
Yes.
And inside those gossipy cups, even the tea is a unique blend, specially made for the Empress. But one world leader had something else entirely in his Empress teapot back in 1929.
Winston Churchill came here. He was not drinking tea out of his cup.
Well, legend has it, yes, there was something during Prohibition that was in his teapot, and definitely not tea. Yes.
So the Empress was kind of in on it. They're like, hey, it's Winston Churchill. We know it's Prohibition, and they put whiskey.
That's how the legend goes, definitely.
I love that.
Yeah, great stories. Yeah.
And the tea time nibbles include Empress scones and Empress clotted cream, and of course, cucumber sandwiches with the crusts cut off.
Mmm.
Now, just like the Duchess of Bedford, we have been revived by our afternoon tea, but we are still left with one tea time curiosity.
Is it pinkies up or pinkies
some
down?
people like the pinkies up, pinkies down, whatever you prefer,
Either way,
but many pinkies up.
I like pinkies up. I think it's cute.
I do as well.
As we continue to ponder that eternal question, time to get curious about Victoria's grandest work of architecture. The bejeweled crown of the British Empire, the British Columbia Parliament buildings are a massive testament to the pride and power of Victoria. That Francis Rattenbury guy designed these too, from 1893 to 1897, in what was called a free classical style.
It's eclectic, very, very popular in the late 1800s.
And all along the rooftop, you will see statues of British Columbia's historical figures, dating back to the 1500s. But in the back, you'll see these beautiful allegorical statues. But why are they there? Well, because of gender equality.
If you look at the figures of the historical characters, they're all men. They could have found a few women if they had really searched, but they didn't at the time. And so they did want women, and so they put the muses from the ancient world, the muse of literature, the muse of music and poetry and so on. So the allegorical women are around the top, and they represent the muses.
See, women need to have their place here in architecture too, right?
Indeed.
And on top of the dome, where you'd normally have a saint or a mythical figure, here in Victoria you have...
Well, it depends who you ask. If people in Victoria are kidding around, they'll tell you it's Wayne Gretzky. It's not. That's not a hockey stick. It's actually Captain George Vancouver, who came here in the 1790s, and that's a flag. He arrived on the west coast of Vancouver Island and circumnavigated the island, and he named it after himself.
And on the front lawn, a statue to the city's namesake, Queen Victoria. But on the back lawn, well, that's where the bird cages go. From 1860 to 1898, these rickety wooden buildings were actually the Parliament buildings, called the bird cages because they kind of look like bird cages. But here's the real curiosity. Even after these new buildings were built, the bird cages remained standing on the back lawn until 1957.
So, from the bird cages of the 1860s to the much upgraded Parliament buildings of 1898, things got a whole lot better. In fact, back in the bird cages, apparently in the winter it got so cold in the chambers the ink would actually freeze. Not very good when you're trying to write new laws. One tradition that carried over, though, you can still see today. Do you see how far apart the opposing sides are here with the desks? Well, that is a long-held British tradition that the space in between has to be at least 2 swords lengths apart. Seriously, they could go like this.
Next, we explore the beautiful Memorial Rotunda with paintings depicting British Columbia's industries. And down in the reception hall, there are 2 massive stained glass windows with 2 completely different British Columbia flags. In the Golden Jubilee window,
the crest of British Columbia includes the British flag and the setting sun. The setting sun, of course, to signify that British Columbia is, of course, on the west coast of Canada. But the placement of the flag and the sun have to be in a very specific order.
But in this window, you'll see that British Columbia hadn't quite figured out its flag just yet.
So the order is supposed to be the flag on top and the sun on the bottom. But here on Queen Victoria's own Diamond Jubilee window, you will see the order reversed. We have the sun on the top and the flag on the bottom. You'll see this repeated several places throughout Victoria, and that's not so good because, as we know, the sun is never supposed to set over the British Empire.
No. Speaking of sunsets, when the sun sets over Victoria, her Parliament buildings light up with more than 3,500 lights.
Any place where they practice their government in Disneyland is fine by me, but there's a great story and a history behind that too.
Absolutely. The Parliament buildings were first lit in 1897 to celebrate Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. That was 60 years of Queen Victoria's reign, and the idea was the lights would resemble jewels in the night sky. They would twinkle.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and it was so beautiful that we've continued it, and now it's really become something of our signature, if you will.
So her diamond jewels lighting up at night, and also to remember that was the time period where electricity was still kind of a new thing.
That's right. Most places did not have electricity at that time, but Rattenbury, our architect, decided to be an early adopter of this new technology. And so it was quite technologically advanced to come here and to see these electric lights across the facade.
From that newfangled technology of electricity, we continue our curious quest into Victoria's downtown to another lighting technology used in the early 1900s.
All throughout Victoria, a lot of its history you can find by looking up to the tops of the buildings. But here we are looking down and we see these cool purple prisms all along the sidewalk. Why are they there? Why do we have purple sidewalks all throughout Victoria?
Well, a lot of people would like to think it's because we have secret tunnels under the city. But we don't. There are no secret tunnels in Victoria. But the glass blocks are the top of areaways. Really, it's something very simple, an extension of the basement out onto the sidewalk for a bit of extra space, and the glass blocks let light into the areas that were used for storage or as workshops.
But why purple? Well, that was thanks to a new innovation. Scientists were using manganese from 1900 to 1914, which started out clear but then oxidized in sunlight. So today we get to follow the violet brick road around Victoria. More than 11,000 of these blocks are still intact. They even glow at night if workers are lighting from below. And there's even more history beneath our feet. These watery designs symbolize the Johnson Street ravine that used to lead to the ocean. And then there's this hidden Morse code along Broad Street.
It's very, very clever because a poem was written called Broad Street Blues. Talked all about the checkered past of Broad Street. But when it came time to put it in the 1990s, it was decided maybe it was a little bit too risque.
Yeah, a poem about ghosts, drugs, and prostitution wasn't exactly going to be a tourism draw.
And so words from the poem were written in Morse code here on the street signs.
So those forbidden phrases are forever hidden in these 24 street signs. Unless you have someone who knows Morse code, and fortunately I do.
Da da da, dit dit dit, da. Dit, 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 and that spells out ghosts.
Of course it does. Da da da, dit 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 spells out ghosts.
So the next time someone tells you to take a left on Ghosts, you'll know they're talking about Pandora Street. And just a few da-da-dits over, we're taken back to 1858 in Victoria's Chinatown, the oldest Chinese district in Canada and the largest for many years. So why did so many Chinese people come to Victoria during that time?
The gold rush?
Yes, exactly the same as San Francisco, big gold rush. San Francisco 1849, here it was 1858, but we were the only port of entry for the west coast of Canada on the Pacific coast. And so everybody came here, and the Chinese established their businesses, and this was the jumping off point and the supply center for all of British Columbia, for Chinese communities as well as others. So that's why we have more old Chinatown buildings in Victoria than any other city on the continent.
In addition to Chinese architecture and Chinese businesses, there is a certain Chinese phrase you will see everywhere.
Up here we have Fan Tan Cafe. This store says Fan Tan Trading, and I know there's a Fan Tan Alley that we're going to get to in a very exciting way. What the heck does Fan Tan mean?
Fan Tan is a Chinese gambling game.
Oh,
and it was a game played by almost all the young men who came here from the south of China back in the 1800s. It was the only pastime they had.
And to get to Fan Tan Alley, we enter Chinatown's Forbidden City, a network of alleyways and courtyards hidden behind street fronts only open to Chinese people.
So let's hope we're not
81.
going to step back in time.
Oh, wow. This is cool. So this is Fan Tan Alley.
This is Fan Tan Alley.
Fan Tan Alley is the narrowest commercial street in North America, at only about 3 feet across at its narrowest, for a very good reason.
It was narrow at each end because when the police raided the gambling dens, they could only come in single file.
But if the police did wedge their way in, there were more ways to block them from getting to those 6 gambling dens upstairs.
The doors leading upstairs had a guard at the bottom, and then halfway up the stairs there was a second door, very thick, with a hatch. You would knock. From the top, somebody would pull a string, the hatch would open, and if they liked the look of you, they pulled a lever, the door opened, and then closed behind you. And then you were finally admitted to the gambling den upstairs.
And if they didn't like the look of you,
the door was closed, and everybody was clambering out the back into the back alley.
As we clamber our way out of Fan Tan Alley, we come upon even more 1800s Victorian debauchery. This area around Market Square was once home to dozens of saloons and hotels. But it wasn't liquor that truly boosted Victoria's economy at this time. It was another infamous commodity. I'll give you a hint. It wasn't tea or salmon.
we have India, we have Hong Kong, we have Victoria, all part of the British Empire, and they were all making a lot of money off of a substance that just sounds crazy and ludicrous to us today. Has a lot to do with these buildings behind us right here.
You're thinking of opium.
Crazy.
So why was opium so big here in Victoria?
It was rather like French wines. There was a snob appeal.
Okay.
The Hong Kong processed opium was considered very good quality. But it was much cheaper to actually process the opium here.
At one point, Victoria became the biggest manufacturer of opium in all of North America.
And the opium factories were behind that building across the street.
Right.
They were behind the buildings over there and behind the buildings right here. There were 13 in total, processing up to 100,000 pounds a year.
Yikes!
Now onto our last curious stop, high upon a hill overlooking Victoria, a stunning Scottish castle.
And why is that there?
Because of a coal miner's dream.
There is a wonderful story about a 25-year-old Scottish coal miner who in 1850 decided, I need to build a better life for myself and my family. So he took his then pregnant wife, boarded a ship that took 191 days to go from Scotland around Cape Horn all the way here to Western Canada. Well, many years later, that rags to riches story came true. This poor coal miner became the wealthiest man in all of Western Canada. And he decided, well, I'm going to take some of that money and build a modest home. Instead, he built Craigdarroch Castle, because who needs modest?
Robert Dunsmuir became a very wealthy coal baron, railway founder, and politician here in Victoria. Between 1887 and 1890, he built Craigdarroch Castle, high upon this hill to let everyone know he was the wealthiest and most powerful man in Western Canada.
It was definitely the statement of wealth. It was meant to be a retirement home for him. He did not come from society. I mean, his family had worked in coal mines, they had experience, but they were not landowners. So building a statement like this within the community and essentially buying his way into society was the purpose behind it.
Yeah, that's how it was done.
Exactly.
And Craigdarroch is also known as a bonanza castle.
What is a bonanza castle?
Bonanza Castle is a building that is indicative of the nouveau riche, the people that were coming out to countries like the United States and Canada and opening up the industrialists, the newfound money, and they were building they've got a bonanza of money and they're building these sort of statements of wealth.
At 25,000 square feet, 4 stories high, with 17 fireplaces, Craigdarroch is a magnificent Victorian-era Scottish baronial mansion. The style is known as Richardsonian Romanesque, which incorporates 11th and 12th century Southern French, Spanish, and Italian styles.
It's a mishmash of things, so they just kind of jammed it together into one style.
It's fantastic.
Now, what about that name, Craigdarroch? Well, since Dunsmuir was Scottish, he carried on a medieval castle naming tradition, with the Gaelic name Craigdarroch meaning Rocky Oak Place. Now, time to check out the bonanza of curiosities inside, like an 1897 Steinway piano, a collection of dance cards on the wall, and all the rooms decked out in Victorian abundance. And then there's the windows. Craigdarroch boasts one of North America's finest collections of Victorian residential stained and leaded glass windows. 32 of the original 47 are still intact. But who were the artists? One of the windows may have been done by the Chicago firm of Healy and Millet, known for their designs at the 1889 Paris Expo. But as for the rest, it's a mystery.
There's always this sense that we're close, but never guaranteed to be able to say for sure this is what it is.
It's a fun curiosity.
It is, very much. This is one great big treasure hunt, this place.
And you can't miss the incredible, intricate, French-polished white oak woodwork throughout. When you first walk in, you will be wowed by that Escher-looking staircase.
Ooh.
And on those wood walls, there's a whole lot of what look like little doorbells.
And of course, being a wealthy family, the Dunsmuirs had the latest in technology in 1890, including speaking tubes, so they could call downstairs or upstairs for their servants anytime they needed. They'd press this button and say, "Bring me my tea, stat, wait, 2 sugars."
Today, Craigdarroch Castle is known as Canada's Castle and stands proudly upon its hill as a symbol of the industrial-era entrepreneurial spirit in what was once the Wild West of Canada. So, from a frontier town built on the fur trade that flourished during the gold rush and the opium trade, to Canada's first transcontinental train that ushered in Victorian sophistication in a truly impressive hotel, then from bird cages to a palatial parliament building and the oldest Chinatown with the narrowest alley to a coal miner that built a Scottish bonanza castle full of curiosities, there is just so much to be curious about here in Victoria.
Thanks for joining us on our educational journey, and hopefully now you're even more curious about the who, what, where, why, and how of Victoria. One thing left to be curious about, though, is it really pinkies up or pinkies down when taking afternoon tea at the Empress? Pinkies up, pinkies down. Pinkies up, pinkies down. The Canadian Pacific Railway achieved its goal of bringing the economies and the people all the way, So the Canadian Pacific Railway brought people all the way from the east coast of Canada to the west. Its terminus was in Vancouver. Why? Well, basically because the land ended. So how did it continue to bring people and its majestic railway hotels all the way over to an island of Victoria?